So Didi Ananda Devapria has been working in Romania for the past 16 years, where she coordinates the project of Amurtal Romania, a home for neglected and abused children, a neo-humanist kindergarten, an after-school, and also an organic farm. She leads trainings in neo-humanist educations on the international level and is currently giving a course on neo-humanist philosophy at the Neo-Humanist College of SFR.
Okay, so uh, these stories that we hear about who, heroes and heroines, they do really go deeply into our consciousness and influence us as young children, give us uh, role models to look up to, some of them which might be positive and some which are negative. I also want to share a bit of personal history. In my case, this is a baby picture. And as you can see, my parents were pretty young when they had us, when they had me. So my mom was only 21 years old, and my father was 22 years old when I was born. And my mother uh, was in college when she got pregnant. And, she ended up finishing college, but at the same time, because she decided to become a full time mother, um, I actually sort of grew up with the feeling that I had been something of a mistake. That just the fact that I had been born had gotten in the way of my mother's own journey to fulfill her potential. She decided to stay home as a working mother with us. However, she was also frustrated, depressed, unhappy during my childhood years. And that decision for her somehow indirectly gave me the message. I mean, this was not a conscious thing. This is something that I realized much later as an adult. But it somehow gave me this message that getting married or having children, being a mother, gets in the way with being able to fulfill your potential in life. And because of that, I think that already way before I had any idea about being a Didi, but I remember as a young person being at work after school. I had an after school job, and my boyfriend called, and the boss was just very casually asking me, "Oh, and then someday maybe you'll get married." And I just had this reaction that was very strong, and I didn't understand why, but I was just like, no, why would I ever do that? And I don't think that's necessarily a normal reaction, but I had this aversion to the idea of marriage and being a mother. And of course, later, uh, I I think actually when I came into Ananda Marga and I started to realize, oh, but there, you could have a partner that's on the same spiritual path, and that was actually quite attractive. So I had, some doubts about which path to take, but there was this strong momentum inside of me that felt that, having a small family to me felt kind of like a prison, and being able to be a Didi ultimately felt like freedom, and to be able to do what I really wanted. And my mother is incidentally, when I was growing up, she had a lot of resentment, I think, and frustration uh, in her own life. And so we had a lot of tension in our relationship because of that. But ultimately, she got over that, and I also had a very strong experience of surrender at one point, where I was able to see her just as a human being, and that was trying her best. And somehow, by Baba's grace, I was able to let that all go, all my resentment and anger and expectations that I'd had of her as a young person. And we had a beautiful kind of forgiveness moment when I was in training center. And since then, she's been very generous in giving me some of the validation I wanted as a young person that I didn't get, of saying, I'm proud of you and you're so fulfilled and things like this. But it's interesting how our reactions to our parents modeling, it's unconscious, but it can very much shape our ideas about gender and roles and what kind of role we want to have. So yes, I wanted to invite you to also reflect on that, but the chats were a bit difficult. So, I mean, sorry, going into the breakout group seemed a little bit problematic because not everybody got to be in a breakout group. Um, but I wanted you to reflect. So maybe you could take a moment to reflect on this and put it into the chat. Um, what messages did you get from your family about men and women, and the role of women? And did anybody else also get similar messages like I did, indirectly, not realizing it until you're older, about what it meant to be a woman or a man, or to be within a certain type of relationship? So I do think these are things that, again, are influencing how we perceive our roles. One is the stories that we're fed or that we enjoy as young people, but also directly observing the narratives and the stories of our own family and of our own, not only our parents, also our grandparents. My grandmothers, on the other hand, were also very powerful women. One of my grandmothers was a very powerful spiritual woman, very inspiring, very ambitious, very driven in a way. And the other one was, although seemingly much more traditional in her interpretation of a female role, and somehow my mother always seemed to be reacting to that. She was a working woman during the world wars, and she, always had a job. And so, she seemed kind of meek and more submissive, but at the same time, she was a working woman. So all of these influences, I think, shaped how I relate to my gender roles, and the potential of women. My mother did constantly give me a message that women can do whatever boys can do, girls can do whatever boys can do. And so I grew up kind of feeling that you know that there shouldn't be any limits, that especially because I was older than my brother, I sort of felt entitled that I should be able to do everything that he did. That if my dad was going to teach my brother how to shoot bows and arrows, I wanted to learn how to shoot bows and arrows. There were a few times, though, when I found it convenient to use my gender role as protection from tasks I didn't want to do. For example, my father was a fisherman, and so we would go out fishing together uh, in the family, and I hated to bait the hook. I really hated it. And so then I would always pretend that helpless kind of female sort of thing, like I would just be like, oh, I can't do it, And then my father would kind of scold me, oh, you're being helpless. And, and but he'd do it. And I preferred that he did it, or my brother did it, or somebody else did it, so I didn't have to do it. So I just put up with him kind of telling me that I was being helpless, and I didn't mind because I then kind of didn't have to do that task. I also sometimes would create elaborate contracts and bribes with my brother in order to get him to commit that for a whole year he was going to do that task for me if I don't know, wash the dishes in one night when he didn't want to do it. So yeah, interesting how we sometimes use these to our advantage, to our disadvantage. But mostly I had this kind of spirit, which again, I think my mom gave to me, just that I should be able to do whatever boys are doing. Okay, I'm interested to look at the chat a bit and see what we've got here. So, so we have, women do it all. I come from a family of strong career women. This is from Reka and Ananda Margasavripas. I can understand that women must serve, that they should be patient. I'm not sure what aguantar is, but support, help. And Lalita, I saw in my family, women tend to work harder than men, and also responsible as a breadwinner, and expected to follow traditions and culture strictly. Planetary leadership training, men do hard work, women do soft, less work. Didi Ananda Anuradha said, I grew up in a family of 6 girls and 1 boy, and my parents were concerned that we become professionals. So education was a big thing. My mother was the administrator. Reka learned from her family that women should not be too strident or outgoing. You don't seem to have absorbed that message perfectly, Reka. I think that you must have added your own lessons into that. Okay, Lalita said, I grew up feeling that women need to put others first, others' needs first before hers. Most of the time, we focus on sacrifice, our identity, and ourselves for traditions and society expectations. Okay, interesting. I got the message, Reka said, that women are sex objects. You know, that already starts from Barbies, you know, and how their bodies are quite unrealistically shaped. And already we get complexes that our bodies are not like that. It's a big thing that goes into shaping our ideas about ourselves. And Chandrika, translation, women should serve, be patient, hold on, and support. Reka said so true. Okay, thank you very much for sharing. One more. My parents, Didi and Andajaya, were married very young, 18 years old. My father gave me the mentality that what a man can do, I can do even better. I really didn't see the difference between the two. My mother was treated well by my father. I learned aesthetics from my mother. Education was priority to my father. Interesting. And Lalita says women should be subordinated to men even though they do all the same jobs. And Advaita, my father usually said that boy and girl same when they do the job. So my childhood was to be able to work like a boy. And also that is why I want to become a boy, so I will get more energy. Okay. Back to my presentation. Yeah, let's just take a moment to look a bit at the archetypes of masculine and feminine energy within Tantra. So in Tantra, there's the idea of Shiva and Shakti as the two sides of one piece of paper. And Shiva, it's interesting to me because Shiva as consciousness is the ultimate shelter, you know, but kind of passive. And it's Shakti that has the energy that is manifesting, creative, and moving towards Shiva. No, the Kundalini is the one that's moving and then merging into the Shiva consciousness. So in some ways, that's also an interesting flip around of how we tend to think of male energy as the active and female energy as the passive and receptive. And so it's so interesting to me how these two things sort of, you know, flip back and forth, these two sides of one piece of paper. And within our spiritual practice, there is definitely a process of integration of these two energies, actually on the level of tantric, what is actually happening within our energy system as we meditate, that we are raising the Kula Kundalini, whether or not we are consciously aware of that process, that is what's happening. The Kula Kundalini is rising through our will, through our effort, through our desire for the supreme, and then ultimately merging into that Shiva consciousness. And we're all on this journey of inner completion, completing this male and female energy joining, merging within our own consciousness. And as we journey on the spiritual path, part of the ideal of our path, at least, is to open the heart like Radha towards Krishna and to become a devotee. And so a devotee, it is interesting, whether you are in a male body or in a female body, the relationship to the divine, when we start to open the heart with devotion, when we start to ideate on being a devotee, actually creates a relationship in which it's more of, in relationship to God, we are all feminine. We are all opening to receive and to let go and to surrender so that our limited ego can be filled by the divine will. And so there's also this interesting thing happening on the individual level of inside. And this is in contrast, I think, to some of the archetypical images of the male and the female within the West. So if some of us grew up, some of us present on the call are from Eastern cultures, and some of us from Western cultures that were more Judeo-Christian faiths influenced. And at the base of that, we have a story which is also about the masculine and feminine energies, Adam and Eve. However, in the way this story is presented, the feminine energy is related to temptation and sin. And why? Because the feminine energy was going to eat from the tree of life and to eat the fruit of knowledge. So somehow this knowledge caused a loss of innocence and to be expelled from this paradise garden, and then, to be cursed with the pain of childbirth and wandering forever in the world, feeling separate and away from the paradise. So, a very different interpretation of feminine energy than the more, I think, two sides of one piece of paper idea of Shiva and Shakti. And this has deeply influenced the narratives in the West about everything associated with the feminine as being inferior. And this is also where you saw like the predominance of reason over nature and the domination of nature and the feeling of that the feminine qualities are somehow weaker and that the stronger masculine qualities are what make us successful or what more valuable in society. However, I was having an interesting conversation today also with Subodh about this, because even though in Eastern cultures there's a lot of goddess worship, there's a lot of recognition of the divine feminine, yet on the practical social level, the social systems that we see in both East and West tend to very much be giving more value, more importance to male qualities than to female qualities on the practical level, on the way societies are organized. And there's much more of a subordinated cooperation, even in those Eastern cultures, which I find interesting, despite the, mother goddess type of stories that exist. Interesting how the Caduceus, the Greek Caduceus, also reflects the Kula Kundalini energy, and how, the serpent, which was a symbol of evil and temptation within the biblical stories, has a deeper tradition within Kula Kundalini, also within the Greek mythology. But also, just if you think about what a snake is, it is a creature that sheds its skin periodically. And this is very much related to also the idea of feminine cycles. And so the shedding and this wisdom and the Kula Kundalini energy, this all kind of related to divine feminine and to enlightenment, which had been a bit denigrated within that biblical narrative, but had deeper roots related to wisdom, related to transformation, continual regeneration and rebirth cycles, etc. And also, again, within yoga, we have the idea of the Ida, the Pingala, the lunar energy and the solar energy. Very interesting, because sun is, you could say, shining. No, it is producing light, and moon is reflecting light. One is considered heating and more of the masculine energy, the sun energy, and the cooling energy of the moon. And that hatha yoga, for example, is about the joining, the merging of these two by force, by willpower, rather than by devotion or by spiritual process. But again, a type of idea of the merging of the male and female, or I prefer actually to say masculine and feminine, because I think male and female is related to our physical form, to our physical bodies, for example. Either we have a male form or a female form. And of course, you would think that the male form is generally more predominated by masculine energy, and the female form by feminine energy. So that's why often we just mix these terms. But I believe it's a bit more clear to talk about masculine energy and feminine energy rather than just male and female, because we have both. We have both within our minds, within our systems. If I'm in a female body, I still also have masculine energy in me as well as feminine energy in me. And just because I'm in a female body doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to value more the feminine energy that I have. In fact, because society puts so much emphasis on certain qualities that are more masculine, many times women do put more value on their masculine traits because those are what society tells us lead to success, and to a bit push away feminine traits as being weak. So we can internalize that same type of dynamic even if we're in a female body. Same thing can happen in a male body, though. A male can either value more the feminine qualities or the male qualities. So it's not just related to our physical form. These are different archetypical energies that do exist in the universe, and they are different. They are opposites, and they are both necessary. They are complementary. They are two sides of one whole. And so it's not about trying to say that they're the same. When we try, we have to be careful that I feel that leading to a greater balance is more about how we value these energies rather than seeing one is inferior, one is superior. Yin and Yang, again, is another representation in Eastern traditions of this opposites that are in balance. There's also this idea of the Wei Wu Wei. I feel that the Tao Te Ching is one of the spiritual texts, perhaps, that most values the power that is within the feminine side of energy. And so, you know, the Tao, I've been reading it a lot recently, and I feel you could substitute the word Tao with Brahma, with the word Dharma. But the Tao nourishes by not forcing, by not dominating the master leads. So there's this idea in Taoism that of Wei Wu Wei, which is often translated as the not doing, but it's not about not doing in terms of being passive. It is actually about not forcing things, allowing, and what it's my interpretation, having reread it now, being much more grounded in tantric philosophy and bhakti, is that this Wu Wei Wu is about actually, Wei Wu Wei is actually about surrender, about letting go, about letting our ego and our desire to dominate and force things our way, our ego way, to surrender that so that the divine grace can flow through us, so that the divine will flows through us, not just our limited will, but that we open up and become an instrument. And that's what it means to live in the Tao. So it's this ability to let go, and to allow something much higher to be leading the way. Yeah, here's another, passage from Tao Te Ching. All streams flow to the sea because it is lower than they are. Humility gives it its power. If you want to govern the people, you must place yourself below them. If you want to lead the people, you must learn how to follow them. The master is above the people, and so no one feels oppressed. She goes ahead of the people, and no one feels manipulated. The whole world is grateful to her because she competes with no one. No one can compete with her. Because she competes with no one can compete with her. The Tao is nourishing by not forcing, by not dominating, the master leads. So again, to these basic archetypical powers of the universe, or Shaktis, these are what determine. I know that Didyananda Anuradha also spoke of this when she was doing her presentation on biopsychology of the sexes. There are these two energies, the Samjogani Shakti, and I asked Shravan to give me a little more insight into the etymology of these words. So he said that literally it would mean something like the power that conjoins, or the power that unites, the power that brings or assembles things together. And this is the feminine energy, the energy that leads. If there's a predomination of Samjogani Yojani Shakti in the embryo or in the disembodied soul, then it will take on a female form. And Vibhagyani Shakti means something like the power that differentiates, the power that separates. So these are described as the Samjogani Shakti in Baba's discourses. It's about attracting towards it. So the centripetal movement, whereas the Vibhagyani Shakti is more of a centrifugal movement, moving out into the world, actively going after things, no, more outward going, whereas the Samyogani energy is more drawing towards itself. So these again are those two energies that determine what will be the physical characteristics of the body, and they're present in the universe. Oops, okay. Yeah, and so these differences exist. These differences between these two different energies exist, and we tend to have one more predominant in us or another. Although gender on the physical level is a spectrum, no? However, what is interesting is that in society, differences only become problematic when we assign value to them. When two things are different, but we determine by our social systems, by the way we think about them, by the narratives we tell, that one has more value, one is better, and the other one is inferior. And that's what's happened with most of our narratives around gender. I remember once one sister was preparing for taking the Anandamarga marriage vows, and she really had a problem with how in the Anandamarga marriage vows, there's these differences in the genders, you know, that the women are more expected to take care of the physical needs or something like this, and the men with, you know, ensuring the how do you say, livelihood for the family. So now, the fact that these differences can exist in a partnership, for a partnership to be balanced, for a partnership to be a true coordinated cooperation, does it mean that both members of the partnership need to have exactly the same roles? That they need to do exactly the same things? Now, I do think generally it's a good idea to, you know, divide the labor and share and be sensitive and like this. But even when roles are not the same, they are complementary. What is important is how they are valued. Because I saw this playing out in my own family again, that my mother felt like my father was continuously encouraging my mother that she should, you know, get a job, you know, also. Not because that we needed a job, but for her to feel fulfilled. He thought he was, you know, trying to help her with, you know, that frustration, you know, like, yes, you should go ahead and do it and go and get a job and like this. And yet I felt that in a way that also sort of implied that the work that she did do as a mother wasn't as valuable as if she was having a job that was paid in the society. And so I think this often happens, that women's work in the families is not really considered as valuable as productive work in society, which somehow is contributing to the economy or something like this. So it's how do we value things? And honestly, in society right now, the narratives still are very much dominated by this more economic model, that what's most important is wealth generation and, you know, having a career. And so women, as they have tried to step more into their power, have done it in the way where they try to do everything, no, to both to be a type of superwoman that is both having a career and spending all that time in getting a job and being somehow competitive and equal in a man's world, usually with similar values, you know, and how you have to be successful, how you have to be competitive, etc. You know, within that same framework, having to operate, and at the same time going home and trying to be the super mom and trying to be there for the children, and, you know, kind of doing both of these roles, which can be, we've seen, very draining for a lot of women. And so, you know, these, again, the roles being complementary does not necessarily imply that they have to be, one has to be inferior to the other, but it's how do we actually value, how can our narratives change in ways that truly give value more to the feminine. And I think this is actually a very, very deep process, and it's involving many more layers of how we relate to society, not just specifically only to our gender roles in the family, but that's part of it. So I'm gonna take a risk here looking at what are these archetypical energies. I'd like actually first to invite you, before I share my thoughts on this, I'd like you in the chat. In the chat, I would like everybody to just type in words that you associate with male energy, okay, with masculine. What is the masculine? What is the archetypical masculine? I'm not saying what are men, but what is masculine energy? So what do you relate to as masculine energy? Please just type words into the chat. Just words as they come up, popcorn them. So protective, grounded, providing, responsible. Nice. Competitive. Brave, bravery, conquering. Yes. Fighting spirit. No. Action. Assertive. Strong. Strong protection action. Okay, great. Impulse, incentive, sports, direct. Nice. See if anything more is there. Okay. What about when masculine energy gets a little bit too much and it starts becoming kind of toxic? What would be some toxic manifestations of masculine energy? Aggressive. Warmongering, hostile. Overbearing, angry. I think impulsive was that one. Egotistical, cruel, divisive, violent. Okay, yeah, that's kind of the toxic now. Okay, so I'm going to share again my screen. I'll just share my thoughts on masculine energy. Then we will go into, oops, stop share. How come it was not? Okay, so I'd like you now to, 1 second, because it was supposed to hide my answers, so you wouldn't see all of them. So I'm going to go back and share it now. Okay, so here are some of my thoughts. I think they capture a lot of what you also said. It was my own brainstorm on the same thing. So I think similarly, strong, powerful, vital, competitive, fighting spirit, rational, heroic, independent orientation. And with an excess, if it gets excessive and then becomes toxic, dominating, controlling, aggressive, destructive. Okay, let's now go into the feminine. So I'd like you to write now feminine. So nurturing, loving, flowing, receptive, good, sweet, giving, soft and caring, caring again, yes. Compassionate, sensitive, sensible, nurturing, lightness, subtle, sacrifice, okay, emotional acceptance, nice. Great. Can you tell me also, Harmonious, what do you feel is the toxic side of excessive feminine energy? Manipulative. All right, good. What else? What else can that feminine energy do? Ooh, nice, Dee Dee. Possessive, victimy, overwhelmed, depressive, shaming, guilt trippy. Weak, over emotional, submissive, weepy. Related to over emotional. Good. Okay. Yeah. Similar. Drama queens, machismo. Okay. All right. So what did I put down? This is my brainstorm. So gentle, flexible, soft, giving, problem solving, relationship orientation, empathic, caring, protective, supportive, sensitive. Interesting that protective actually came up also on the masculine side. And excess can lead to jealousy, irrationality, vanity, sensualism, gossiping. Yeah, so similar to what others had also said. Yeah, so, actually really like the idea. once, I think it was from Kamaleshwar, a discussion with him, was, saying like, when the father's in the house, you feel safe and protected. And when the mother's there, that's where you get the feeling of sweetness and nurturing and care, but that kind of feeling like that, the archetypical positive side of the father figure, the male, is that giving that security, that stability, that strength, that protection. And the feminine is giving the nurturing, the love, the sweetness, the aesthetic side too. So yes, these two sides are very complementary, and you can see how we have all of this inside of us. All of these qualities we have inside of us. And what's very interesting on our spiritual path is that our tantric path, on the tantric side of this idea of tantra, we have this in all of us, including the females amongst us. We are developing our fighting spirit to go past all obstacles, to be strong, to be powerful, to be heroic. We have that is part of our tantric philosophy. And at the same time, our bhakti, through our kirtan, through developing devotion, makes us gentle, it makes us soft, it makes us more sweet, it makes us more loving, So I feel that, our spiritual path really has this beautiful, delicious combination of both. And if you even look, at how didis and dadas are encouraged, like even with our haircut, like, so, the women, not all women, but the didis within Ananda Marga are encouraged to have really short hair. And I notice, when I cut my hair really short, it makes me feel more daring, more bold, more kind of like, I don't know, it brings out some more, you could say, masculine qualities than having long, beautiful hair. And I noticed then, the dadas, they have these sometimes really long, really beautiful hair. It also kind of brings out some more softness in them, more feminine side. So I think that there's this really interesting, challenge to balance ourselves within, to bring out both of these qualities and to become a balanced human being by nurturing the positive sides of both of those types of energies and being aware of how they can accumulate and become toxic if they are in excess. And so, really trying to achieve that personal balance. So that's kind of on the personal level of how we can relate to gender energies within ourselves and our spiritual practice. However, there's also social implications to these, not just individual. So, on our individual level, we have to make ourselves strong and balanced and sweet at the same time through our spiritual practice. This to help us to become whole human beings, to feel complete within ourselves, and to be able to be a partner, an equal partner, whether we are in a female body or in a male body, to be able to have that equal partnership with the others in our lives. And so the paradigm that, Baba's given us for this is the idea of the two types of cooperation, that in the world there's subordinated cooperation or there's coordinated cooperation. Subordinated cooperation obviously being what he points to as having been the main system that mostly we see all over the society, subordinated cooperation, where somebody is, feeling that their opinions and their way of doing things are better than, and that other people must follow that. And so, there is a pyramidical type of system usually functioning. And coordinated cooperation, on the other hand, is where you have equal partnership between equals. He said, like, the difference between a king and a king versus an emperor and a king. So when there is that mutual respect, mutual working together, this is coordinated cooperation. I really like this graphic. So the idea of the power in coordination, the power in working collectively together, versus everybody being individualistic. Now, our capitalistic systems, what does it encourage? Individualism. So this idea of coordinated cooperation is really something, that requires a different type of communication, decision making, and processing, which in my opinion is where this more feminine qualities, I'm not saying just female, but feminine qualities of giving importance to communication, to feelings, to listening, to really understanding everyone to cooperating versus competing and dominating. These qualities are qualities that we would need to develop more in order to achieve proper coordinated cooperation. Now, I was listening to something on gender last night from Sadhguru, and he was talking about how, okay, I don't like women's rights. We shouldn't talk about women's rights. He didn't say he didn't like women's rights. Sorry, that's not true. But he says, we should focus more on human rights, not just women's rights. Now, I agree. Human rights is indeed the larger umbrella, and that women's rights are human rights. No, it's not just for women. It's just when you take care of any group in society that's been chronically marginalized, chronically oppressed, you're actually taking care of everybody. No, doing that does a service to all of humanity. As Baba says, it's like the two hands or the two wings of a bird. Cannot fly properly with only one wing. Half of humanity not being properly developed creates a lopsided movement in all of humanity. So yes, embracing this idea of human rights. But, his kind of argument was like, well, there's only this very minor physical difference, only a difference of a couple organs that are different. Why give so much importance just to reproductive organs? We are much more than that. We are, we should just look at the human being, and we shouldn't be so obsessed with our bodies and with our differences that are so minor. Now, there's truth to that. But there's also not truth to that, because the experience, that was a male saying that, not a female saying that, which I find significant. Because I felt it's a little bit similar to a white person saying, I don't see color. I don't see color. Well, the sentiment behind that's nice, because you want to say, no, I see that everybody's a human being, and we have, trying to express kind of sama samaja tattva, we all share the same experience as human beings, which is true. But it does invalidate or kind of say, like, your experience, I'm not interested in hearing it. I don't want to hear it because it's uncomfortable. So the experience of being female in a female body in this particular society, in this particular age, is not the same as being in a male body. There's many reasons for that. I think my other Didis and other speakers in this sessions have kind of clarified some of the biopsychological bases of that. And so I feel that it is important, to give space to understand what is it like to be a female right now, and what are the things that our brothers can do to support us, because, we need brothers that understand and want to be allies to help really for women to be able to achieve their full potentials. Because like in any type of situation of privilege, a lot of those things are not that men are bad and that they're consciously trying to be oppressive, but it's just that they're privileged members of a system that values more the masculine energy than the feminine energy. And so until we're able to really, through these ideas of coordinated cooperation, really to appreciate and value the strength that exists in empathy, in cooperation, that's an awareness revolution that we have to bring about. I think it's really interesting that even the narratives around history are changing. Jeremy Rifkin wrote a very interesting book called Empathic Civilization. Those in my NHE class have been reading parts of that or are aware of it. So the empathic civilization is actually kind of a rewrite of history. He's looking back at history and saying, even though history's generally been written from the standpoint of wars and who dominated and who won and who was strongest, etc., that's usually how we study history. I'm studying Romanian citizenship right now, and I have to memorize all of these heroes who are all males and are all significant, war heroes. But he's saying, actually, if you look back at history, what defines human progress and what defines human achievements more than competition, domination, war, etc., is our capacity to cooperate, to collaborate. It is our empathy, that is our more human, and our compassion that define us more and that have led to our greatest achievements. So that's an interesting rewrite of history that, again, puts the value system, turns the value system a little bit upside down. And I think that's really necessary. I think we have to go back and kind of relook at things and to see you know, was it really only the competitive and dominating values that led to progress? Or what about, our abilities to create more and more complex, more and more cooperative types of systems? I'm sometimes coming out of my PowerPoint so you don't just have to look at the slides all the time. Okay, yeah, and so, in terms of how we organize society, this is the subordinated cooperation model, the hierarchical model, with somebody at the top, who's the leader and who has to make ultimately all the decisions. And so you've got one person and their intelligence and their limitations as well at the top, guiding or misguiding the whole group of people below them. This is another model, which is called sociocracy. This is with interlocking circles in order to lead an organization. And here, what do you see? You see that you have these different circles, and in the middle, the yellow people, they are members of the smaller circles, but they are then on a larger coordinating committee, and the coordinating committee is composed of members who are also members of the different circles. Now, interestingly enough, our guru, Baba, what has he done? He's created a hybrid that has elements of both of these. No? So we all know that Ananda Marga, at least on the level of the sannyasi structure, is very pyramidical. Yet, at the very top, okay, we do have a Paroda Pramukh, but his role is supposed to be more symbolic and spiritual, right? Who really leads the organizations are circles, central committee, acharya boards, Paroda boards, Tattvic boards. And at every level of our hierarchy, there are supposed to be ACB boards, which are advisory committees, etc. They're not, but the idea is why? Because we are supposed to be learning how to make our decisions using the wisdom and wealth that comes from collective decision-making processes over processes which only one mind has to have all the responsibility for finding the right direction. No, that when you can get feedback, the more feedback, the better, because it makes you flexible, more adaptable to change, less rigid, more resilient structures when they are agile, when they're adaptable, when they get feedback often. And that's what circle structures can do. As long as you don't get bogged down in trying to go after the impossibility of getting everybody to always agree. No, you have to just get consent. Like people, it's the art of cooperation, and the art of collective decision making is not to try and just dominate things with your opinion, but to allow things to move forward, even if it's not exactly what you wanted. As long as things are moving in the right direction, and they will be able to get feedback, and according to the feedback, the direction will be corrected. So I think these types of systems, now what we haven't done so much in non-market, everybody actually is very comfortable and familiar with a hierarchy because that's what we all have grown up with, and that's what's the dominating model of society, and basically we don't really know another model. What we have not explored equally, and what we really need to, I think, develop in order to create a more functional way of operating our organization, is to develop the power that exists in collective decision making, to take it very seriously, and to learn how to value that more feminine side of listening, of valuing emotion, and yet balancing it with rationality and Samasamaja Tattva. Yeah, in Kali Yuga, the real strength lies in an organized body, in the collective mind, no? So that is where we have to really learn this lesson of how to work in coordinated cooperation, how to be equal partners. And part of that is also, as those of us in female bodies, not waiting for other people to give us equality as if, serving it to us or something. No, like to develop ourselves, to develop our masculine energies and our feminine energies, to value both of them, and to really become a full, strong, powerful partner in whatever we're doing. In every field of collective life, there should be cooperation among the members of society, where this cooperation is between free human beings, each with equal rights and mutual respect for each other, and each working for the welfare of the other. It is called coordinated cooperation. When people do something individually or collectively, but keep themselves under other people's supervision, then it is called subordinated cooperation. In each and every stratum of life, we should do everything with coordinated cooperation and always avoid subordinated cooperation. We should do everything with coordinated cooperation and always avoid subordinated cooperation. Very interesting. So even when we're working in hierarchical structures, that's not an excuse to then use subordinated cooperation. That type of respect, that type of, cooperation, and that listening to the group and to the collective mind is always important, not to fall into some kind of excuse. Oh no, it's this pyramidal structure that gives us permission then to be dictators. No, that is not the spirit of what he was trying to give. So both men and women are children of Parama-Purusha. They are like his two hands. He has given intelligence, strength, and stamina to all. Men and women must work together in coordinated cooperation to achieve a glorious human society. Inevitably, the society must move along the path of progress. So, coming back to this idea of narrative, I love Subodh's causal analysis because it really looks at how, problems are not just what they appear to be on the surface, like the surface of the iceberg. There is so much more below that is actually influencing how we experience that surface level of the problem. So, inequality between men and women, there's social causes, there's worldview, and then there's these myths and metaphors. So this deepest level of narrative is actually very significant in how we experience the world and how it shapes the way we view the world. And then that creates social causes, and then that ultimately manifests in what we see in the world. Now, I was recently having some conversations with some people within Ananda Marga, and I was coming across this something that was just bothering me. No, let me just stop the chair for a second. So, and I was feeling, what is it? I don't know. I just don't like this, you're either with us, against us type of thing. Where is that coming from? And I felt there's actually a story here that's bothering me. It's not a particular individual or something. There's something wrong with the story. What is it? What is it that's wrong with the story? And I called to Subodh, the causal layered analysis, guru or founder of that system of way of thinking and analyzing things. And it's very much related to, I feel, our neo-humanist philosophy. And so I said to him, I was like, what is that? And he said, Mahabharata. And I'm like, still it's Mahabharata? I thought that was only at the beginning of our organizational problems. And really? And he's like, no. You have to understand. For us in Southeast Asia, it's always Mahabharata. And it's, that's one of the defining, underlying myths and so forth. And I'm like, but. So, okay, yeah. And Mahabharata, is that really an appropriate, it's a wonderful story. I have the Bhagavad Gita, in the room where I just flip through it very often. I love it. I love the teachings in it. They're very profound. And yet, is the Mahabharata really the guiding narrative for our organization, for our age, for what we are here to do on this planet now? I think not, because I think that was a story for 5,000 years ago. It was focusing on overcoming a particular type of social sentiment, the attachment particularly to the loyalty felt to family. However, at this age, I think even its application can be toxic, that fighting between the family is not what we are all supposed to be about, and that rather we need a new story. And so he actually guided me through a process of CLA just on the spot, a kind of quickie. And it was really interesting because it had me, close my eyes, kind of go through a visualization, I think to kind of get in touch with your Ati Manas Kosha, with where the archetypes are, where the deeper stories are. And he just asked me to, kind of what came to my mind. And what came to my mind spontaneously was the image, I will show it to you, of a banyan tree. And so a banyan tree is something that is spreading, has many branches that all root into the ground. And this is an image that has a lot more to do with connection, bringing things together. It's going into the earth. It's kind of ecological. No, and this is a narrative that I think, at least for me, this was more of a personal process. This isn't about anybody else except me, but like for my own narrative, yes, this is a more healthy narrative for me, to be able to create connections and bridges, and to be connected, to the mycelium under the ground, and to the air and the leaves and so forth. So I really like this type of image. And indeed, this is the challenge now, I think, that we all individually and collectively face, is how do we create more healthy narratives like that give us inspiration and energy and that lead us in a positive direction. So up until now, I think a lot of since the Industrial Revolution, a lot of human narrative has been shaped by the idea of the factory and industrialization model of development and so forth. That's not going to be taking us very far into the future, especially with the way that the planet is reacting to that type of mentality that we've had of production and so forth. So an ecosystem, Gaia, the planet seen as a whole living organism that has its own consciousness, and which we are embedded within it. We are not dominators. We are not just users. We are part of it. We are integrated into the system. And how ecosystems, there is this amazing synergies. We only have to look at it to realize, yes, that is already, a model that's right there before us of how the divine feminine and the divine masculine are interlocking, working in harmony and together, because that is actually how the whole ecosystem works. It's complex interacting relationships that are complementary, that are nourishing, mutual nourishing. There's no waste in an ecosystem. There's only waste in a factory. No, but in an ecosystem, what is waste from one system is nourishment for another system. So in a forest, you do not find trash, except what human beings have left. The leaves that fall from the trees, they recycle into the earth, they build the soil, they create more nutrients, they go back into the system. So there's nothing lost. Everything is recycling, regenerating. And if human beings we can consciously align ourselves more with narratives that are based off of the ecosystem and which give value to the feminine as well as to the masculine energies, then I think we will be able to harness our rationality, our intellect, that sharp ability, to problem solve, by guiding it, connecting it to our feminine energy of care, of nurturance, of protection, of listening, of taking feedback, and to create systems, to create a relationship between human beings and the earth that is no longer destructive and degenerative, but that rather is regenerative, nourishing, supportive. And so it's my feeling, a deep feeling, that this is where we have to bring more value to those feminine qualities within ourselves, first of all, whether you're in a male body or in a female body, to recognize the importance of those feminine qualities, not to reject them or to see them as weaker or less, but to recognize the power that they carry, and that's the type of power that's necessary for helping our planet, helping our humanity to become more integrated, more balanced, and more whole. And I think already the younger generation has very different ideas about gender and their, the limitations or non-limitations of their gender. So here's a grandfather bringing a gift to his little, granddaughter, bought her a little bow, and she says, but what is it? And she said, well, it's something girls usually wear when they do girl things. And she says, awesome. And she puts it here like a bow tie. And she goes back to her science lab to do science stuff, which for her is girl stuff. Why shouldn't that be girl stuff? So I like it that, we've started to move beyond stereotyping, and that the new generations have broader spectrum of what it means, to be male or female, and so forth. So what narratives can carry us towards a new vision of coordinated cooperation across genders? So this is going to be our discussion question for the rest of the session. But I do also want to bring in one last thing, which is, what does it mean to be an equality ally? Now, what are allies? Allies are when you are not, okay, so there's two things. One is resistance. Resistance is when you're a member when your group, when you or your group is being treated badly, and you stand up against that, and you stand up for fair treatment. Being an ally or allyship is when you're not part of that group, but you're standing up side by side with that group to work for their equal acceptance, their fair treatment in society. And again, like I said, women's rights are human rights. No, this is about, usually when one group becomes more free, it frees up everybody. No, it frees up both sides, not just the minority or the marginalized group, but also the oppressor group is freed by that action. And so if a larger group of people can come together to amplify the voices of others and create a better environment for all, that's when we start to see tangible progress in equality. And equality not meaning the sameness, but fairness, no? Coordinated cooperation. Whoops. So yeah, another thing with the difference with being an ally is don't make assumptions, no? And don't do things for people. Don't do things for women, for sisters. Do it with them, consulting them. Don't assume, because when we make assumptions, we can sometimes unconsciously fall into the oppressive patterns of being, paternalistic in this particular case. So ask questions, be curious, ask people about their journey. Listen empathically, show up. We ask our employees to show up for one another. Oh, sorry, I must have copy pasted this for something that was for employees. But I mean, like if you're working together, show up means like if you see something happening, don't just abandon the person to have to deal with it on their own. Be there, be alongside of them, stand beside them. There's a powerful thing that when women, often there's this thing called bystander effect, which means when somebody's being treated badly or somebody's being harassed, let's say they're being sexually harassed or they're being intimidated, let's say it's a woman being intimidated by men, often other people are all hoping somebody else will step in. The more people that are present, the less likely that individuals will take an action. Everybody will wait for somebody else to do something. So a powerful thing that women can do is if somebody is being harassed, and not only women can do this, men can do this also, but is simply to go and stand beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. And then if more and more people do that, then that woman is no longer alone. And a lot of what the bullying that happens is because of the perceived relative weakness, especially when it's one single alone woman facing a group of men. And just the act of there being more people, more strength there, turns that dynamic around. So I think that's an accessible type of step that we can all do if we see something like that happening. And speaking up. No, silence is also implied consent. So if there's, comments that are made that are putting anyone down, especially on the basis of their gender, then to speak up, to give a voice to it, even at the risk of offending somebody. It's better to speak up and be seen as being intolerant of sexism or racism or whatever the ism is, rather than being quiet and kind of like going along with it and actually letting it happen and letting it continue to multiply. So that's for food for your thought. And now I'm going to stop my share. I want to, could somebody help me to just type that into the chat?
Excuse me, DDG, you've got a question from Didi Nanda Anurada in the chat that relates to the Mahabharata.
Oh, okay. So Didi is saying, Didi, you are saying that an Ananda Marg organization at a central level is guided by the narrative of Mahabharata that we have all, I don't know what that next word is, toastase, a heroic fight?
Stage. She says stage.
That we have all what?
To stage.
I still don't understand what
to stage a heroic fight.
To stage a heroic fight against evil. Could you elaborate as to why this is not a healthy narrative? Okay. Why is this not a healthy narrative? Well, what happens at the end of the Mahabharata? Didi, you can unblock your microphone since you're asking the question. What happens at the end? How does that story end? It's not exactly a happy ending. Everybody dies. No, everybody dies at the end. Okay, like I said, the Mahabharata, it's this idea that, you know, Dharma, you should stick to Dharma, even if your own brothers are like, you know, going against Dharma. But we have to remember here, in the current situation of society, who are the real demons in human framework, etc. Now, I mean, these are people that are so far away from the nucleus, from the divine nucleus, that, you know, Vidya is no longer influencing them. They're able to be really cold, calculating, kind of psychopathic about materialism and just, you know, who are the real enemies of society right now. It's not us. We are all maybe defective people, not so perfect, have our flaws, have our weaknesses. But if we're kind of all on the spiritual path, you know, we're kind of brothers and sisters moving towards the same goal, and we need to support each other. We need to amplify each other. We need to be united. You know, we need to be creating more and more relationships, not just among people following the same spiritual path, but among all moralists, among people from other religions. No, how are we going to, you know, include and be inclusive and respectful and work together with people that are identifying as Christians or Islamic or, you know, Jewish or whatever, if we're not even able to have healthy cooperation and dialogue within our own movement? You know, so it's, for me, it's like, yes, that's not going to be healthy if it's creating the sense that it's dharmic to be divided amongst your own family. I don't think that's a message that's appropriate for our current situation. I think our current situation is that we need to, you know, we need to be united. We need to be on the same page. We need to be working towards the same goal. So I hope that answered Didi's question to some extent. And yeah, now's, I think, for discussion open. So please.
Didi, sorry, I think we ran out of time. You
Oh,
still
okay.
have 2 minutes for question and answer.
2 minutes, okay. Any questions that anybody has? They can open their microphone and just ask. Any feedback? You can also write into the
Didi,
chat.
Anuradha said on the chat, women's rights were recognized because groups of brave women stood strong together and demand their rights. She
Women's rights.
commented on the chat.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Yes, brave women stood together and demanded their rights. Absolutely. I hope I didn't say anything that contradicted that. But if I did, you are right. And, you know, both women standing up for their rights as well as, you know, men also are important in that process, I think, of amplifying and also recognizing where they need to make space for women. Okay. Any other comments, feedback, questions?
I think there are no questions, Didi.
No
It's
questions?
only excellent presentation.
Any feedback? Okay.
Thank you, Didi. I love the comments that you put together and the connections. It's really opened my mind quite a bit. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Thank you for that, Rekha. Namaskar.
Yes.